Today, we're digging deeper into food. So yesterday we talked about how our food stores energy for us, and today we're going to look at several different types of nutrients in our food, the three big ones, which we call macronutrients, okay? And our goal is that by the end of class, you will be able to list the three and then give me a brief description of them, okay? The food you eat is made up of three types of molecules: carbohydrates, lipids, and proteins. Those are the three big ones. All three categories of what we call macronutrients contain carbon and hydrogen and oxygen. That's largely what they're made of. So, why then are they different from each other? If they're made of the same things, why do we have different names for them, and why do they behave differently? Well, there's a difference in how those atoms of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen are arranged, the types of bonds that form between them, and as a result, the size and the shape of the molecules that form from them is different from each other, and so they serve different purposes in our bodies. You're going to see in the images that we look at different amounts of carbon and hydrogen and oxygen. They're going to be bonded together differently, and the molecules are going to be shaped differently. So they're going to do different jobs for us. All right. Let's start with carbohydrates, because that's the ones that we tasted this morning, right? Okay. These are a simple sugar or a polymer that's made up of simple sugar molecules. A polymer is a fancy word for a big molecule that's made up of a chain of much smaller molecules that are sharing their electrons with each other. So if you think about it like a train, the simple sugar is like one boxcar on a train, and the polymer is like the whole train, okay? So you have a bunch of these little simple sugars chained together, and they make up the big molecule of the carbohydrates. So that right there is the answer for why when we ate the bread and chewed it up in our mouths and it started to break down, it tasted sweet. Because all carbohydrates at their base are made of a type of sugar. And we know that sugar tastes sweet to us, right? So if you start the process of breaking that carbohydrate down into its base parts, you're going to get sugars, which are going to taste sweet to you. The structure of a simple sugar is that it just has 5 or 6 carbon atoms, and it has 1 oxygen atom for every 2 hydrogen atoms that are in it. Things that fit into the category of carbohydrates are simple sugars like glucose and fructose. Okay? If you mix glucose and fructose together, I believe you get sucrose, which is the sugar you are used to eating. So if you have a simple, if you just have a jar of sugar at home, you probably have sucrose. Okay? Complex sugars also fit into this category. So combinations of simple sugars, like sucrose, which is a combination of 2 simpler sugars. And then the last one that fits in here is starches. So if you've ever eaten a starchy food, then you have eaten a carbohydrate. Okay? Glycogen is the starch that your body builds up in your muscles. And cellulose is the starch found in most plants that helps give them their structure. Okay? Those 2 things are long chains of simple sugars. So it's not just 2 simple sugars mixed together, it's a whole long chain, like we talked about with the train example. And that's how we get those bigger starch molecules. What we're going to learn as we start talking about these is that most foods that you eat on a daily basis are a combination of the different macronutrients. So somebody said they'd had a muffin. A muffin is going to be mostly carbohydrates, but it could also have some other macronutrients in it too. Okay, so let's talk about the other ones. But before we do, let's actually look at a picture here. And I know this is on your notes as well, but these are some of the simple sugars, fructose and glucose. And when we combine these together with each other and we start making chains, that's when we start to get those long carbohydrate molecules. Okay? So you'll notice in your book, if you look in your book, there's lots of pictures of carbohydrate molecules, and they're very long and made up of these guys. All right. The next one we're going to talk about is lipids. Okay? Lipids are compounds that are made of glycerol, which you may have also heard of referred to as glycerin, okay, and fatty acids. And when they combine those into those long chains again, so we're going to be talking about polymers a lot today. Anytime you hear the word polymer, just remind yourself it's a chain of smaller molecules, right? So anytime we combine glycerol or glycerin and fatty acids together into a long chain, we get what's called a lipid. And you may have guessed from the word fatty acids in there that when we talk about lipids, we're talking about fats. Okay? So fats are important because the chemical bonds that form in lipids are actually able to store more energy than the bonds that you would find in a carbohydrate. Okay? So they can store actually twice as much energy, which means you don't need to eat as much fatty foods, as much lipids, to get the same amount of energy, which is why you'll see that the health department recommends you eat fewer fats than you do carbohydrates because they are a much more concentrated source of energy. There are two different types of lipids, and you've probably run into both in your life, okay? The first are called saturated, okay? These contain single bonds between carbon atoms, so each carbon can hold more hydrogen atoms around it. So when we're forming these chains, okay, we're going to have these carbon atoms, and they're just going to be bonded carbon to carbon. So what that looks like is you have a carbon molecule, and then a single bond to the carbon molecule, and a single bond to the carbon molecule, which means that these guys can each hold several hydrogens around them, okay? Each of those lines that I drew around it represents a hydrogen that it can be bonded to. The second type we're going to talk about are called unsaturated, and these guys contain double bonds between carbon atoms, so they can't hold on to as many hydrogen atoms. So if I was going to draw that, if you remember before, we had just a single bond here, right? Well, in an unsaturated, there's a double bond, and carbon can only form 4 bonds. So when it's forming a double bond, this one on the end can only hold 2, and this one in the middle can't hold any hydrogens extra. So it's not holding as many hydrogens as it could be, so we call it unsaturated. Okay? The main important difference that we need to remember between saturated and unsaturated fats is that unsaturated fats don't form these nice long straight chains. They get all kinked up and turned and twisted. And as a result, unsaturated fats don't stack together very well. They don't stick and get compacted. So they melt at lower temperatures, and they won't clog in your arteries as much. You may have heard people tell you that there's some fats that you should eat if you're trying to be healthy, and there's some fats that you shouldn't eat, right? There's healthy and unhealthy fats, they say. And what they're talking about is the difference between saturated and unsaturated. Now, it's good for your body to have some of both, but definitely if you're eating a ton of saturated fats, that's when people start to see people who have a tendency towards heart disease, they can have those fats build up inside of their arteries in their heart and cause clogs and stuff, which is not great for your heart, obviously. Okay. Things that fit into this category are going to be fats, obviously. So fats are a type of lipid that are solid at room temperature, and they usually come from animals. So if you're thinking like the fat that you find on your steak or the fat that comes off of bacon when you cook it, that's a fat, because when you cool it down to room temperature, it's going to become a solid, and it is usually found from an animal product. Okay? Most animal fats are saturated fats, okay? Which is why you'll hear people who are having heart issues complain that their doctors won't let them eat as much bacon, right? Lots of saturated fats in there, okay? And then we have oils. Oils are lipids that are usually a liquid at room temperature instead of a solid, and they generally, not always, but generally come from plants. So think about your olive oil, right? Or your vegetable oil that you may use when you're cooking. It's a liquid at room temperature, and it's based in plants. More of oils than fats tend to be unsaturated, which is why somebody might switch to margarine, which is plant-based, from butter if they're having an issue with having too many fats in their life. The last molecule we're going to talk about, actually, I should wait because I know there's going to be a picture. Okay, so look at those long chains, right? And you can see this must be a saturated fat, right? Because notice how the bonds between the carbons are single. Okay? That means this one's saturated. If it was unsaturated, it would have more of the bonds like this one here, right? Which would mean there'd be fewer hydrogens, and the molecules will get bent and stack less nicely. Okay, now we can talk about the last molecule that we're going to talk about today, which is proteins. So we've covered carbohydrates and we've covered lipids. The third big important nutrient that's in a lot of your food is protein. Okay. Proteins are polymers again. So again, we have long chains here, right? And they are long chains built of what is called an amino acid. Okay. An amino acid forms when carbon atoms share their electrons with a bunch of other things. They share them with a hydrogen atom, an amino group, a carboxyl group, and an R group. Okay, I'm going to skip ahead through the slides here to get to a picture, so don't worry if you don't have everything written down because we're coming back, okay? But I want to look at this picture. It's on the last page here. You have it there on your notes, okay? So look, we have the carboxyl group. So this is our center carbon right here, right? Okay? All amino acids are going to have an amino group that looks like something similar to this. They're going to have a carboxyl group that looks like this. They're going to have one little lone hydrogen over here that looks like this. And the way that these amino acids are different from each other is their side chain, or their R group. So the reason they've written an R here is that the piece that connects to this part of the carbon looks totally different for each of the 20 amino acids. Okay? So this is the sort of general structure of one single amino acid. And when we chain a bunch of different amino acids together, we get a protein. Okay? So let me back way up to where we were before. Okay? The R group is what sets each amino acid apart from each other. So each amino acid has its own separate type of R group. In total, there are 20 different amino acids, okay? So the rest of it all looks the same, but there are 20 different R groups that can go on an amino acid, and depending on what R group you have a different amino acid. Okay? Your body can make 12 of the 20 amino acids all on its own. So your body is equipped to make 12 amino acids for you, 12 different ones that it can use to build proteins and do jobs in your body. Okay? However, you'll notice that it can't make all 20, right? But you still need those other 8, which is why we call those other 8 the essential amino acids, and you have to get those amino acids from the food you eat. Okay? So if your diet that you eat lacks protein, the reason your health is going to struggle is because you're going to be missing some of these 8 essential amino acids, okay? Because you're not going to be getting them from your food. Largely, we get our protein from meat or animal products, okay? Protein is used to help you digest your food, to help your body fight off infections, to help your body heal cuts, and even to help carry oxygen from your lungs to the rest of the tissues in your body. Okay, there's lots of structures in your body that are built out of proteins, that if your body doesn't get protein, then they don't build them. Things that fit into the protein group are meat. Okay, so meat that you might get from an animal is going to be full of protein. Eggs are a good source of protein, so are some dairy products. And there are some kinds of beans and legumes like that that do have some protein in them. Okay, so you'll notice that we get most of our proteins from animals or animal products, which is why if you are choosing to live a vegetarian or a vegan lifestyle, it's really important for you to find alternate sources of proteins and sometimes to supplement your diet with some vitamins and things that may have some of the amino acids you're not getting. Okay? Because those products are the source of a lot of proteins which have those amino acids that your body requires to be healthy. So it's not saying you can't be vegan or vegetarian. It's totally okay if you want to be, but you do have to put a little more thought into your diet. You can't just cut out all meat and not put protein back into your diet in another way. And there's our picture again of our amino acid, and if you chain these together, you'll get your protein. All right.